Hey everyone, I'm your host, Dr. Eric Block, and welcome back to another episode of the Deals for Dentists podcast. Through these podcast episodes, I will be interviewing dental professionals and companies and aim to inspire, entertain, and educate you on the best tools and technologies out there. My goal is to help make your practice and career more profitable, efficient, and most importantly, more enjoyable. Today, I'm joined by Phil Herndon. He is a licensed professional counselor and serves as the clinical director at Sage Hill Counseling. Today's podcast will be about rediscovering your story as a dentist. Phil and I will be taking a look at dental professionals and the stories that we bring in every day as we walk into our practices and how that impacts the quality of work we do as dentists. As always, I hope you enjoy this episode. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the Deals for Dentists podcast on your favorite podcast platform and our weekly newsletter so you don't miss any of our upcoming shows.
Phil, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, man, great to be here, Eric.
Now, Phil, I just wanted to start by, as a dentist, and when I say dentist, it really could be any dental professional and really any health professional or anyone with a job with high stress, high intensity job. Can you just tell us, I could talk here all day about the stresses that we go through, but let's say a dentist like myself walks into your office for the first time. Typically, what is that conversation starting out as?
Yeah. Well, if a guy like you walks in my office, here's what I automatically know. We mentioned this earlier too. You and I did, we were talking. I know you're bringing into my office a wealth of intellect, a wealth of morality, meaning I already know that you want to have a positive impact on people. You want to matter in your community. You have a tremendous level of willpower. You're really tough. Like, you get things done. You'll persevere dental school, further training, and the hours that you put in your practice, and the pressure you operate under, even financially, especially just starting out, having a staff. So I already know about you when you walk in the door, just by virtue, in your case, of being a dentist. I already know those things about you, which means that you're really good at dealing with life from here up. You can think through things, you can figure things out, you can just, when it comes down to it, you can get tougher and continually answer the bell. So I already know that what we're going to talk about is inevitably going to have to be that area here in your chest, because to educate you more, to give you some kind of boot camp experience to make you tougher, to sermonize you and tell you all about how bad it is to be burnout or alcoholic or whatever, that's going to bounce off of you. And it probably needs to bounce off of you. So we're going to make a beeline for those territories between those three great tools that dentists and healthcare professionals are so good at. So we're going to go between. We're not going to take away intellect, morality, or willpower. We're going to work in the territories like attachment or lack thereof. What your EQ is. We know your IQ is sky high. What is your EQ? What's your story? What story do you drag in there that, despite all your intellectual prowess and toughness, how is that story creeping into your everyday life? Every time you work with a patient, every time you do a procedure and something goes wrong, every time you do a procedure and nothing goes wrong. What happens in your insides as you go about your work? And then what's your real story when you're not in your office? When I know we're going to make a beeline for all that really intangible territory that's more limbic than it is thinking brain.
Yeah, you mentioned, drag your story in. And so, Phil, when you mention dragging your story in to the room, I'm a dental professional and I go from room to room, and it's exhausting, day in, day out. I'm treating my patient, trying to give them the best experience. And then I'm going to the hygiene room and checking that patient, try to give them a great experience. And personally, I was dragging my story into the room every time. And my story was an introvert and a people pleaser. And I didn't want to say no to anyone. I didn't want to have uncomfortable conversations. I wanted to please everyone. And I think that was really taking a toll on me day in and day out. So that was kind of me bringing my story into the dental chair, into the operatory, day in and day out.
Yeah, taking that metaphor, it's almost like You can drag things behind you walking forward, and then you can pull stuff walking backward. It's almost like what you're describing is you were walking into the room backward, dragging that story. So you were far more present back here in your anxiety and depression or rage or self-pity or resentment or whatever's going on here. And the patient was actually seeing your back, metaphorically, because you're far more energy expended over here that you may not have even known, Eric. Like, you didn't know what you were doing. All you knew was professionals end up surviving conversations and surviving patients more than they're being present with their patients, because metaphorically their back is turned and they've got this huge burden they're pulling as they walk backward into each of those rooms. And so we end up.
Yeah, I had a staff member that one day told me, "You always look so stressed all the time." And I didn't even realize that I had that look going on, but I probably wasn't even aware of it.
No doubt. You're again, metaphorically, your back is turned to everyone. And we expend high capacity leaders, healthcare professionals. We're really good at doing something out here while having so much going on under the surface. And what they're seeing is you didn't realize, you didn't know it. There's so much energy toward maintaining this outward facade to take care of my patients that I really care about. We really don't see. And that's where I've told guys for years, I wish I had a mirror, because they start talking about things. And so that's where stress actually comes from. It's like, I am working so hard to appear one way to this patient while so much limbic, emotional energy is going toward making sure none of this stuff pops out from under that lid, that it becomes an emotional pressure cooker. And so what do we do under pressure? I'm a big Peloton bike guy. And so it's, sometimes the instructor will say, pay attention to your face, what your face is doing, you're doing. If you're tense, I'll see that, like, oh. And as I begin to get more present here, even physiologically, my face changes. So you're walking around. Your body's holding a lot of trauma and your face is showing it.
You mentioned the Peloton, and that's a way for you to kind of get that energy out. A lot of dentists, and I've heard some crazy statistic that a lot of dentists and just health professionals, a lot of them, they turn to getting sedated. And when they get home, they're turning towards synthetics or alcohol just because of the pressures of work, and they want to get home and they just want to be able to escape those pressures.
Yes. What we talked about, that coattails so beautifully on what we've been talking about, Eric. You spend how many ever hours a day exerting that kind of energy on keeping that story you're facing while trying to appear present here. When you get home, it's like, it's almost like when you've been tense and you finally untense. Well, there's this idea called pairing, and the professional can begin to pair whatever his thing is: alcohol, synthetics, pornography, whatever it may be, the stock market, like whatever it may be. He will begin to pair relief, comfort, refuge, rest with whatever that is he's using when he gets home to quote unquote get away from it all. So internally, emotionally, limbically, you ask a dentist, what is the synonym of relief? He wouldn't say this because he's too filtered, but if he were unfiltered, he or she would say alcohol or pornography or whatever the synthetic may be that he goes to. And those two things limbically are exactly the same. If I can just get home, just get out of here, I'll be okay. And that's when those two things become the same. What your book so beautifully addresses, Eric, is in some ways, it's the unpairing of those things. Coming into a room is paired with hiding, secrets, keep up the facade, stress. Getting home to the synthetic is paired with relief, refuge, and comfort. And so what the book addresses is how to separate those things.
That you mentioned the word facade, and that's such a great word, because we as dentists and a lot of health professionals are in the same boat, but you can't have a bad day. I can't go in there and tell the patient that I'm not on my A game. For example, after my second COVID shot, I took the day off after, but my first day back, I was still really tired.
Mm-hmm.
Could I, tell that patient that I was feeling tired and not feeling well? Of course not. So I have to go in there with this facade that everything's great and put on, like an actor, put on this show for them to give that patient that great patient experience.
Yes. And you're talking about two different concepts there. One is the concept of boundaries. There is a pairing with the word boundaries, and the word boundaries is necessarily paired with the word harm. Boundaries are what I set up to not be harmed or do harm. And so you're doing, that's a beautiful example of the same thing in my office too. Like I don't need to be dumping what's happened to me on someone coming to me for a dentist in my office for help. But that boundary is, I know I feel terrible. I feel like crap. I've got the vaccine in me and the after effects, and I don't want to harm this patient. So those are boundaries are set from a very spiritual place inside of us. It says, okay, this has to do with harm, me not being harmed or causing it. I need to stop here. Until that, but again, that's at the cost of having feelings. It's scary to do it. It's sometimes angering. The second thing you're talking about, that every dentist listening to this, he or she will go, oh yeah. Dentists in particular, more so than maybe any other healthcare professional, dentists face literal faces that are having a horrible experience, though the dentist may be giving them an incredible dental experience. And they may not be having any physical pain at all, but the emotional pain associated with dentistry, it's kind of amazing. Like surgeons don't ordinarily face, people know, well, golly, surgery has come so far and blah, blah, blah. The thinking about dentistry is not that way. A lot of people will still have that idea of, oh no, pliers and big shots and drills. Oh, this is going to be horrible. And so you look at, there's an aspect of human development called limbic regulation. And it's a concept of, we know when our children look in our faces, they're looking at our faces to see if they're okay. And I've used the example before, when those listeners who have children, when your children are learning to walk and they get out there in no man's land and there's no table to hold on to, they fall back on their bottoms, they'll look to mom or dad or both. And if mom or dad are freaking out, they'll freak out. And if mom or dad goes, hey, they'll go, okay. That's limbic regulation. And so we don't outgrow that. Like if we had logged on today and you were weeping and had your head in your hands and all that, I wouldn't go, Eric, man, I got this incredible joke. Listen to this. Like I would know not to, because I'm looking at your face. Well, dentists walk into rooms, and most rooms they walk into, the faces they're regulating off of are faces that the limbic brain can read as rejection. I don't want to be here. You're going to hurt me. This is scary. Oh, that's not every single person, but dentists, I think, more than any professional, the literal faces that you guys regulate off of are very different faces than a lot of other professionals do. And so that limbic experience of limbic regulation, looking into these faces, it takes a toll and will reinforce the necessity of keeping your back to the patient metaphorically while you're dragging that story in here. So in some ways, if a guy, a dentist, a person, I've worked with men, I'm sorry about the male pronouns, but the dentist who has not dealt with what they're dragging in there, those faces will often reinforce the power of that story.
Yeah, it's so true. You mentioned surgeons and surgery, and our patients are awake. Whereas surgeons, most of the time, their patients are asleep, and they can focus on what they're doing. Meanwhile, our patients are awake. We have sharp things. We have drills in their mouth, and they're a moving target. And we're in these awkward positions, and we have to be calm. We have to make them calm and have this great experience, and do that day in, day out. It is exhausting. You do that, and you could easily get burned out. And I think you mentioned early that looking in the mirror is so important. And I had to realize by looking in the mirror what was going on with me. Why was I trying to escape the office at lunchtime. I couldn't wait to get out for lunch. And then I couldn't wait to get out at the end of the day. I couldn't wait till the end of the week to get to the weekend. I couldn't wait until I retired. And that's no way to live. So I had to look at myself in the mirror and say, this is no way to live. These problems aren't going to go away. And that's when I started going into therapy. Would you say, Phil, is that the first step, is really looking at the mirror and telling yourself that there's a problem and you need to get some help?
Yeah, it's probably the oldest adage in the book, Eric, but it's just true. This sentence I'm about to tell you is spoken about classic addiction, but I believe it totally applies to burnout. And here's what it said about addiction. Addiction is the only disease that has to be self-diagnosed to be treated properly. Other diseases can be, if the addict is not diagnosing himself or herself as having the disease of addiction that needs treatment, it won't happen. If you replace burnout, the first step to burnout is what you just said. Wait a minute, I am living for 5:30. I'm living for that Friday off, or I'm like, and you said the key word, this is no way to live. Anyone, and several people that are in your office, their tooth hurts or their whatever's going on, this is no way to live. I got to go see Dr. Block. And so it's a very human experience. And when we're experiencing pain, the first step has to be recognition and truth telling that I'm in pain. That's what brings people to your office if you're not there for prophylactic work. So what you're saying applies, though the adage may be worn out. It's like awareness is the first step to healing, and the action step to the healing is self-diagnosis of, I cannot do this. This is no way to live.
Now, you just mentioned an analogy of a patient in pain. They're in swelling, they can't live with this anymore. Is essentially that physical pain similar to the emotional pain that I was going through? Like, that patient is having physical pain. They can't stand it anymore. They need to call me to get the pain resolved. But I was having the emotional pain where I couldn't see myself practicing like this for the next 30 years. So I had to do something. Is pain? Is it the same?
It is the same. It's even the same physiologically, Eric. There's the spectrometer scan to scan the brain. Most people have seen the images, like this is the brain on cocaine, this is a brain not, and those are SPECT scans. If you'll notice, let's just take the feeling of hurt, for example. If you'll notice, when we're describing emotional hurt, like Eric and I are friends and he stabbed me in the back, or Phil slapped me in the face, or broke my heart, or punched me in the gut, or ran over me like a train. Those are words that speak to physical pain. Well, they are euphemisms for emotional pain. Well, come to find out, when they started doing spectrometer scans, they found out that emotional pain and physical pain are processed in the same exact spot in the limbic brain as the other. Therefore, people take opiates when they break their ankle, and they take their opiates when they get their hearts broken. And so we are physiological. The groundbreaking book by Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score. Just like a dental patient comes in and says, I'm hurting very, very badly. You sought treatment with your therapist and said, I'm hurting badly. My emotional tooth is killing me. My emotional jaw is swollen. I can't eat. I can't emotionally eat. I'm destitute. So it not only is metaphorically comparable, your limbic brain, the emotional part of you, literally experiences physical pain and emotional pain in the same spot. It doesn't know the difference. Therefore, that's what the pull to opiates is all about.
Well, now, what if I didn't go through therapy and make some major changes, and I just continued on with the way things were going? I was miserable. I was stressed. I was nervous all the time. I wasn't getting involved with, social functions at work. I was avoiding people. It took a while, but I got back to the point now where I enjoy going to work every day. What if I didn't? Would it eventually have turned into, alcohol addiction or synthetics addiction? Or does this ultimately lead some people to suicide?
All of the above. And I have told people this. If that's not addressed, the best outcome you can hope for, and again, this is not every single individual, but the vast majority of professionals, those things you labeled, addiction, synthetic addiction, process addiction, suicide, self-harm, like all those things. And the best case scenario is your wife or your husband or your partner, your children suffer not being able to have you at all, and a shell of the man or woman goes home, and their own families, their own social circle begins to survive them rather than to be with them. So that you got, and I've told people this before sitting in my office, like, look, here's your future. Let me tell you your future. I'm certainly not threatening you. I'm letting you know I'm so glad you're here. And as we begin the journey, let me tell you the outcome if you don't do this with somebody. It doesn't have to be me. But here's the best you can hope for if you continue to survive, because here's what's going to happen. The load you drag into there with your back to your patients, it's going to get bigger. And you're going to have to work harder to do the dragging, which pulls you way further from your own identity and brings you less to bring home to the people you love. And so the best thing you can hope for is to be a shell of a person and finally get to retirement and be utterly and completely devoid of substantive relationships 360 degrees around you. That's the best case scenario.
Now, when you said somebody, I went to a local therapist, you're a therapist. Could this also include a mentor, a peer, a life coach, a consultant? Is anything better than nothing, would you say?
I would say that. And here's what to look for. I was a guest of another therapist podcast, and the subject was how to know you're working with someone that's going to be effective for you, essentially. Like, how do you know good therapy? And there is an idea out there. It's called the support change continuum. It's a fancy way of saying we need both. And so whether it's a mentor, a friend, a consultant, a guide, a coach, or whoever, if that person provides both support, I hear you, Eric, man, that sounds like rough. I'm so sorry these things have occurred. And change. And what you're doing with this story, Eric, is destructive. It's going to kill you. So let's hone in on that story you're dragging behind you into that office. And so my stuff's on my wall and someone else's stuff is on their wall. So whatever's on the wall matters less than will that person do both? Will that person support you and move with you into change? Mm-hmm. So you get all change, you're going to end up getting beat up. You get all support, you're going to end up getting enabled. And so where between the two, what's the mix between the two? And can that person sitting with you over a cup of coffee do that? Yes or no? And can that therapist with 500 credentials on the wall, can he or she do that? And if the answer is no, it won't work.
So it's got to be both, but ultimately you got to do something. And it's got to be, like you said, self-diagnosed. You gotta figure out that you need to make some changes because I still see it every once in a while. I'm a shell when I get home. As an introvert, I am totally out of gas when I get home, and my poor kids and wife, I get home sometimes and I'm just like staring at the wall, and not nearly as much as I did before, but that's not fair to them. That's that they're not getting the full me when I get home.
No, they're not. And you mentioned introversion, Eric. I don't know any statistics. My guess is the overwhelming majority of dentists I've worked with, introverts. Dentists are so good at tight spaces, compartments, linear, systematic, concrete, your meticulous attention to detail. I don't know what they're called. This procedure has to be done with perfection, incredible giftedness in that territory. It makes that whole intangible world of feelings and relationship and social engagement way harder and scarier. It's just temperament. And you combine what all we've been talking about so far with introversion and things that get outside those boxes that dentists are so good at working in, it's incredibly stressful. And that goes back to your idea of my wife's an accountant, so she's geared like that, introverted, numbers, columns, rows. And my son, he's 25, and he is very much like her in temperament. And so in high school, he was an athlete. He didn't have 15 teammates he hung out with. He hung out with 3. And they were tight, and they were his buddies, and he's getting married next March, and they're in his wedding and all that stuff. But I'm different. I was a ball player. I had 80 that gave me energy, and that would totally overwhelm him. So the fact that so many dental professionals are introverted means those relationships in which you tell the truth and you debrief your story and you allow yourself to be vulnerable with, you won't be as much quantity as the quality. What is the quality of the depth of those relationships where you can go tell the truth to somebody?
I think you just nailed my childhood. I was a tennis player and I played singles because I didn't want to depend on anyone else. I just wanted to go out there myself. So there must be, I think you just nailed my introverted childhood. So dentists versus other health professionals, we talked about the introversion and the stresses of the profession, but it's not just dentists. Anyone with really a high stress job that has to perform. For example, I talked to a veterinarian that had a mishap. It was actually, coincidentally, it was during a tooth extraction on an animal, and they made a mistake and the animal suffered, and that stayed with her for years and still kind of haunts her. So it's not just dentists. It's would you say it's anyone with a high stress job suffers from these anxieties and burnout?
Absolutely, yes. Kind of goes back to the very first thing we started with. No matter what the discipline is, no matter what the gender is, anything else around, a high capacity professional, it has gotten to where he or she has gotten out of having tremendous power in how they think, how tough they are, and how much of an impact they want to make. And those are very high stakes. And people that move into, whether it's healthcare or business or whatever it may be, working on animals, working on people, they hold themselves to very, very, very high standards. And the affirmation that their intellect, morality, and willpower is helpful is part of the fuel. It's not bad to desire affirmation. This veterinarian who made a human mistake that she'll probably never make again and probably had never made before, but she's human and she made a mistake. The opposite of affirmation, the condemnation, there is a huge core wound in a lot of high capacity professionals. And the core wound is, I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble. And so a bad procedure, a mistake, or a procedure that was not necessarily bad, but the patient has a bad experience somehow or another. That core wound, whether this veterinarian or whomever else, they're called, no, now I'm in trouble. I really messed up. Now I'm in trouble. That's where that work you and I have been talking about, whatever that story is this veterinarian had, it activated something in her that is a limbic reminder of, I'm in trouble. I made a mistake. I'm bad. And so that's where to address those things, I use the word limbic a lot, but to address those things, because she knows, as a professional, she knows these things can and do happen. Cognitive data says some procedures go badly. Well, she knows that. And she can work hard and train and all that. But when something happens like that, that goes limbic, that goes emotional. And that core wound and all the messages around that wound start screaming in her ear 24/7. Mm-hmm. She will hang on to it when it doesn't make sense to hang on to it. It happens. Any professional who has patient care, it's going to happen. But the data doesn't matter anymore. And that's where this veterinarian, if she began to have those conversations about addressing that core wound of, I'm in trouble, I'm bad, I'm no good, because that's what she will be dragging into those exam rooms.
Yeah, and now, with the extra pressures of social media and reviews, you make a mistake and a patient leaves a bad review, and it can multiply in your head. Phil, again, thank you so much. Every time I talk to you, I feel smarter and a little bit better about myself. So, you're just a wealth of knowledge, and you're even a better person. So I wanted to thank you for joining me again. Phil, any last advice, any last words of wisdom for dentists, any dental professionals out there that may be suffering from anxiety or burnout?
Yeah, and I'm not just saying this because you're here. Get that book, The Stress-Free Dentist. It is a great read, Eric. It's so well done. There we go. And this is not a shameless plug, and Eric did not ask me to do this. It's a great book. It's easy to read. It's a great resource. If it's too scary to actually pick up the phone and call someone, read the book, get the information in you, and then do something. Even if you have to begin, this is for those listening and watching, even if you begin, if it's just a cup of coffee with someone you think you can trust to say something to, start there. And gosh, Eric, great resource. Always feel free. You can call the Tennessee Dental Wellness Foundation, TennesseeDentalWellness.com. Glad to direct you to some help in your area, help you get that. So make some action around addressing, because going back to the self-diagnosis piece, if it's not self-diagnosed, it will not be addressed.
It's such great advice there. And, even if it's something small, like you said, having a cup of coffee with someone you trust, at least you're doing something and you're taking that first step. So, Phil, thank you so much. Let's be in touch.
Enjoyed it, Eric. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care.